All right, let's make a start. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to start with an acknowledgement of country. All right. The Australian Centre for Student Equity and Success acknowledges Indigenous peoples as the traditional owners of the land. With 60,000 years of history as the original educators, their knowledge and culture plays a vital role in our work and vision for a fairer nation. We respect elders past, present, and future, and are honored to learn from Indigenous colleagues, partners, and friends. Thank you, everyone. My name is Ian Lee. I'm the Director of the Research and Policy Program here at the Australian Centre for Student Equity and Success. In 2024, we funded 10 small research grants, and these grants are due to be completed from the end of February onwards, and we'll be publishing the final reports over the coming months. So please look out for those on our website. But today we are very delighted to have Dr. Tomasz Zajac, project lead of the ACSES Small Research Grant titled Investigating Relationships Between First in Family Status, Equity Groups, and University Access, and his project team, and they are here to share the early findings of their project with us. Tomasz is a Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for Social Science Research at the University of Queensland, and he's the Deputy Lead of the Opportunities Research Program at the Australian Research Council Centre of Excellence for Children and Families over the Life course. He's a sociologist specializing in quantitative methods, particularly in using linked administrative data. His research interests include individual educational trajectories, especially within tertiary education, labor market outcomes of graduates, and social inequality and its impact on young people's educational and professional paths. Thank you, Tomasz. The floor is yours, and everyone will have time for Q&A after Tomasz' presentation.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to present the results. And thank you, everyone, for coming to the meeting or zooming in. I will try to present my slides now. Hopefully you see just the slides. Yep, okay. I'm getting a confirmation from Ian, that's good. So yes, I'll be presenting some early results from the project titled Investigating the Relationship Between First in Family Status Equity Groups and University Access. And I'm presenting on behalf of a larger team. So, so that there are some of my co-authors among the audience as well. So yes, it's me, but also Garstal, Wojtek Tomaszewski, and Ning Xiang from the University of Queensland. And before I present the results, I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that we are connecting from. In my case, these are lands of Jagera and Turrbal people. And I would also like to pay my respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. And another bit of introductions. Before I talk about this particular project, I just wanted to say a couple of words about my broader program of work, because those projects are all related. So as you heard, I'm interested in educational and labor market trajectories, and I tend to use administrative data to investigate them. So here are some examples of other projects that this project is related to. So it was a study on on the relevance of mental health for the current equity groups framework, for which we used then MADIP data, now it's called PLIDA. There was a study funded by the Center of Excellence, the Life Course Center, it's a shorter name, and the Australian Government Department of Education. And this project used also administrative data to improve educational equity over the life course. And within that project, there was a smaller component focused on the labor market outcomes of graduates coming from equity groups. And another project funded by the Life Course Center, Educational Pathways and Intergenerational Outcomes. And here there's a component focused on building capacity. And this is also, me partly moving towards research infrastructure, because this building capacity component aimed at delivering data workflow that would help me and then other researchers to prepare, apply the data for analysis. And there's another project, which is Social Science Research Infrastructure Network. And part of that project includes improving metadata for PLIDA. So I'm not only a researcher using PLIDA, but I want also try to contribute by making PLIDA more usable for others. Okay, and now back to the main topic. So I will start by talking a little bit about background and the literature. So you probably are all familiar with the current equity framework and the fact that Australia has spent quite some time developing different outreach, access, and transition and enabling programs. And here there are the key documents, the Dawkins White Paper, Fair Chance for All document prepared by the Department of Education, as well as Equity and General Performance Indicators in Higher Education by Martin. And all of those documents, they lay ground for the current equity framework. And the aim was to actually affect the student population and change its composition so it would reflect better the wider society. And it focused explicitly on access and representation. And the equity framework identifies 6 groups based on characteristics that are associated with barriers to higher education, participation, and success. And you probably know that these are people from socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, people from rural, regional, and remote areas, people from non-English speaking backgrounds, people with disability, as well as women, with particular emphasis here on those participating in non-traditional courses. And this framework has been scrutinized over years, so there are multiple reports. I'm not going to go into detail, but you can find more about the performance of those groups, and they've been assessed mostly, in terms of participation, success, retention, completion. And well, this drive to change the student population and was, coincided with massification and development of demand-driven funding system, and that the goal here was to increase the domestic student numbers and also provide a greater access to higher education. But it's probably worth mentioning that while equity was an important part of the discussion, this was also heavily influenced by human capital theory and the need to compete in the global economy, so increasing the skills within the population. So as a result, there was an increase in enrollment rates, although this wasn't without controversy. People were worried that universities might be enrolling students that are not well prepared or prepared enough. It had those changes had impact on participation among some equity groups, but the impact wasn't uniform. There were still some groups that were a little bit behind. And there are still issues with what we would call horizontal inequalities. So students from underprivileged backgrounds that are not equally represented. And there are differences in terms of types of institutions that they attend, but also degrees, which could be split between those that are of higher prestige or lower status degrees. And as you probably noticed, first in family students weren't included in the original framework. But there are multiple reasons, and there's plenty of evidence suggesting that they should be considered one of the important disadvantaged groups. And within the literature, there are multiple definitions, but commonly this category is interpreted as people that have no parents that obtained university degrees. And there are sometimes different names for this group. So it could be first-in-family students, but sometimes who are also called first-generation students. And those terms can be used interchangeably in the literature, although there are some differences. But both terms share a focus on students who may face unique challenges, and among those challenges we could list limited access to guidance about navigating the university system and understanding how to apply, which courses to choose, and so on. And also feelings of isolation stemming from the fact that they might feel they are different from typical students. Also the pressure to succeed on behalf of their families. These are all challenges identified in the literature. Also, international studies that focused on characteristics of first-generation students found that they tend to come from lower-income families. Their parents tend to have lower occupational status. They tend to be older when they enroll than non-first-generation students. And quite often they come from an ethnic minority. But bear in mind, this is from international literature, so it might be slightly different in Australia. Also, studies that looked specifically at first-in-family students identify certain barriers that are common for those students, and among them are poorer school performance. And this could be partly explained by parental educational and cultural capital. But also those families offer less information, mentoring, and identity support than middle-class families can offer. So these are the things that I already talked a little bit about. So for example, being able to understand how the university system works and where to apply, what the courses are, and so on, and how to navigate it might be a lot more difficult for a person who can't really ask their parents or anyone in the family for guidance. And another barrier is fewer financial resources that's linked to generally lower socioeconomic status of students coming from parents from families where no parents have higher education. This is also related to greater reluctance to assume student debt. The fact that they've got fewer financial resources, they don't want to take additional financial risks. And another point is struggles with a sense of belonging. So again, feeling different from other students, typical students. And this is particularly important when you think about student dropout, where student integration with the social and academic system of higher education is really crucial for student retention. There's also broader sociological literature that also supports the idea that, well, we should look into first-in-family students as potential equity group. Parental education is probably the most important indicator of socioeconomic status, especially in this context, and that's for two reasons. One is it's really crucial for parental occupation, and it also is related to parental income. So it kind of shapes other dimensions of socioeconomic status. And also previous studies have found that this particular indicator has a greater association with offspring's educational attainment. So it's a particularly good predictor. Also, previous studies have found that socioeconomic characteristics of families, as well as available social and cultural resources, can profoundly influence youth in a couple of ways by affecting the individual dispositions, so views, attitudes, and aspirations, but also capabilities, and this include cognitive and non-cognitive skills, as well as behaviors, so that post-school pathway and course selection, this all can be, has been shown to be affected by socioeconomic characteristics, of which parental education seems to be of biggest importance. And the sociological research has been underpinned by different theories, but the two that stand out are the concepts of Bourdieu, who focused on different forms of capital, including economic, cultural, and social capital, and families. He posits that families use those forms of capital to maintain and reproduce their privileged status. So all the knowledge that parents have about higher education system, but also the habitus that they equip their children with, this all helps them succeed in higher education. And Boudon's theory is interesting because it links the socioeconomic inequality and educational outcomes by exploring two types of effects, and primary effects, which are which are the direct impact of socioeconomic background on academic performance. So students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds are likely to perform worse in academic settings, and that affects their chances of successfully progressing through education, taking the entrance exams and so on. And there are secondary effects, and the idea is that students at the same academic level might perceive their chances of succeeding differently depending on their socioeconomic background. And this is the secondary effect. So even though someone might succeed academically, this person might not pursue academic pathway just because they look at it differently, and the perception of it is different from because of the lower socioeconomic status or coming from a less privileged background. Okay, so this was the theory and the lit review and previous research, and this all was suggesting that there are reasons to look into first in family status as a potential equity group. So now let's go to the research aims of this particular study. So we wanted to investigate whether first in family students should be recognized as an equity group. And to do this, we need to answer a couple of research questions. So what we need to do is we need to check what are the overlaps between first in family status and existing equity groups. So the idea is, well, if this is a group that belongs to another group, it will be already covered. So we will check that first. And then, of course, if this is to be an equity group, we should observe some effects on university enrollments. But we also wanted to check whether any effects that we observe are different from the effects that other equity groups have on university enrollments. So whether these are independent of each other. We also want to check whether first in family students choose fields of, or actually end up studying different fields of study. It's not always about choice, but end up studying different fields of study than non-first in family students. And also, last thing that we wanted to check is, okay, if we observe any effects of first in family status on university enrollments or the field of study, are those effects different depending on whether these people also belong to an equity group? So are people who are first in family and also come from rural areas. Are they more affected by being first in family or less affected than those that come from major cities? And now how we achieved that, so the methodology. So the data that we used for this research were provided by the ABS. And so we used PLIDA, and this data set used to be called MADIP. And we didn't use the whole asset because we definitely needed that. So we just focused on the 2016 census, information from Higher Education Information Management System, HIMSS, and migration data. And here I've got a little diagram explaining, census was our main file, our main data set, and we're using a file with information on individuals. And this file was connected to itself. So this is the parental characteristics. So the trick was that we have information in the census on the role within family. So using that as well as the information on the family ID, we can link individuals to their parents as long as they live together. And that informed our choice of the age cohorts. That's why we are looking at people who were 16 or 17 at the time of census, because that's when people still mostly live with their parents. So we are able to link to parents to children, and that's how we know what was the parental education and who's first in family. Then we also added some other family characteristics from the family file, which is family income and so on. And we added information from migration records. And this is to filter out, actually to select people who are eligible for support from the government when they study. People need to be either Australian citizens or permanent residents to be eligible to get HECS loans. And this is necessary for them to actually be fully recorded in the higher education management system, information management system. So we only look at people who are eligible for state support, and we look whether we can find them in higher education records. And this is how we know whether they enrolled a couple of years down the track. So we've got higher education records going to 2019. So we give them, and we gave them, so we give them a couple of years to enroll. And we ended up having over 443,000 observations. So that's quite a lot. And that's the beauty of using PLIDA, because we've got data on the entire population. So this is just a subset, but in principle, we've got here the entire population of people that were 16 or 17 years old in 2016. And this is a disclaimer. I'm not going to read this one and torture you with this, but this is what I need to put in every publication that uses this data. So it basically says that this is all legal. Okay, and now the measures that we've got here. So dependent variables, enrollment in higher education, and we just look at the bachelor level courses. And we want them to enroll by the age of 19. So the cutoff date is different depending on the age, whether they're 16 or 17. Then we look at enrollments in selective institutions, and selective institution here is defined as selective institutions are those that belong to the 1/3 of universities with highest average tertiary entrance scores. And we look at this variable only for those that enrolled in any course. So we don't mix the effects of enrolling in any course with the capture this separately from enrolling to any course. So we will look first at who enrolls, and then within this group, we'll just look at which students enroll in selective institutions. And then there's another variable, which is the field of study. And here we used 10 broad fields from the standard Australian classification of education. But because there are two very important fields, law and medical studies, which belong to much broader categories, we decided to separate them from social sciences and health studies, respectively. So we have those very prestigious fields as separate categories. So we ended up with 12 categories. And we only use this variable for those that enrolled in any course. Then we've got our independent variables. So the first one is first in family status. We here look at parental education. If someone has no parents with university education, we then classify them as first in family. We've got non-English speaking background, which are foreign-born individuals who arrived in Australia up to 10 years before commencing their studies and don't speak English at home. I mean, they speak another language at home. They might speak English too. We've got low socioeconomic status, and this is area-based measure. So we look at socioeconomic indices for areas, CIFA, and we use Index of Education and Occupation for that. Then by using the Australian Statistical Geographic Standard, we identify regional, rural, and remote students, and that's based on the location during census. We also have Indigenous status, which comes from the census, and we've got individuals with disability, and there's a significant difference between how we define this variable, could define this variable, and how it's defined in departments. I mean, the Department of Education in their publications, because we had to rely on the census, and census captures disability slightly differently. We've got a variable that captures whether someone requires assistance in the day-to-day lives due to a long-term health condition or a disability. Whereas in higher education, in HIMSS and now taxi, people or students are asked to provide information whether they've got any condition or disability that might affect their studies. So there might be a different threshold for that. So we might actually be looking at a subset of people with disability. And the final variable here is sex. That's what it's called in census, whereas the name for the equity group is women in non-traditional areas. And well, women have to be enrolled for us to be able to identify whether they are in non-traditional areas, which we can't do for people who are not yet enrolled. So we are just looking at differences between men and women. And apart from that, there are control variables, which are also related to socioeconomic situation, and that's living in a single parent household. Got family incomes, 5 categories for that, and also having a parent working in a high prestige occupation. And it's enough to have just one parent to be in this category. So, and the analytic approach, and actually there are some other variables that I'm not mentioning here, other outcome variables, and it's all going to be available in the report, but I needed to keep this presentation relatively short. So yeah, the first step is to investigate the overlaps. We just use descriptive analysis for enrollments. This is logistic regression, and there are 2 models. The first one is where we just put all the variables in, and that one allows us to see whether there are effects of first in family status and whether they're independent of the effects of equity group membership, but we also have another model with interactions, and that one is to see whether there are any moderating effects of equity group membership. So this is to check whether first-in-family status works differently depending on whether people are members of an equity group or they are not a member of equity group. And the difference between analysis for enrolling in a selective institution and the analysis for the field of study is that in the latter, we use multinomial logistic regression model. And I'm deliberately not putting any formulas here to make it more friendly. And I won't be even presenting all the coefficients. So what you will see soon will be mostly predicted probabilities or differences in predicted probabilities or average marginal effects. So these are almost all model-based results, but they're expressed in an easy to understand metric, which is just the probability. Okay, so let me go to the results. And so first, the overlaps between first-in-family status and equity groups. And the first thing to say is that first-in-family status is actually a much more common characteristic than other groups. So, you know, it's like 2/3 of students belong to this category. But as you can see here, we've got those bars that represent the proportion of first-in-family individuals. And just a clarification, there are potential first-in-family students because, like, at this point, they are not students yet. So we don't know whether they will be first-in-family. Maybe their children will be first in their families. But yeah, so these are people whose parents don't have education. So as you can see, the proportion of these people is much larger among those who belong to low SES category compared to those that don't belong. It's 87%. So nearly everyone in this category is also has parents that do not have university degree. It's similar among indigenous people. There are also differences, but smaller between regional people that live in regional areas versus those that live in major cities. There's also some correlation between first-in-family status and disability, and then almost no differences between men and women. And in the case of NESB individuals, they're actually less likely to be first-in-family or not have parents with higher education, which is understandable given the selectivity of the migration system in Australia. So that's about the overlaps, and now enrollments. And from now on, it's all regression-based results. And these are as I said, estimated probabilities. So yeah, they come from a model, and then we estimate for first-in-family and other groups, depending on whether people belong to this category or not, what is the probability of enrolling in higher education. And here you can see that, well, first-in-family is associated with quite a difference, because among people who are first-in-family, we predict the probability of enrolling to be 35.7%, whereas for people who are not in this group, it's 58%. And that's much larger than for most other groups, except for people with disability. But yeah, that's one thing. The other thing is that we've got two exceptions here. So women and NESB individuals. These are two categories which are not actually disadvantaged when it comes to university enrollments. They're actually more likely than the counterparts, well, which is men and people that speak English at home, respectively. They're more likely than those groups to enter higher education. The next slide is based on the second model. So here we've got interaction terms. So we could estimate the adjusted proportions or probabilities for combinations of first-in-family status and membership in different equity groups. So as you can, and this is mostly to show you that being in a, when we could observe disadvantage before, for example, for low SES students, being low SES and be first in family is actually associated with worse chances of enrollment. And same, we can observe the same for regional remote students, indigenous individuals, people with disability. Slightly different from for women and NESB categories, because as you could see before, they were not actually disadvantaged. But the next step is to see whether the effects of first-in-family status are different depending on whether someone is low SES or not low SES. And here you can see that the differences are not that large, meaning that the being first-in-family doesn't impact people that are low SES much more than people that are not in low SES category. There are some differences for regional, people living in regional areas, slightly bigger differences for indigenous people, and the biggest difference for people with disabilities, where the effects of first-in-family are actually stronger for people that do not belong to this category. So that's where we see most moderation. Now I will move on to enrollments in a selective institution. So please remember, this is only for people who are already enrolled in some institution, and for those we check what portion of them goes to a selective institution. And even though I said we've got like 1/3 of institutions identified as selective, the share of students going to those institutions is actually larger than 1/3. It's closer to half of the students, and that's because these are just larger universities. So you can see that there are still differences, although not as stark as before. And all the characteristics that were associated with like lower chances of enrolling are still relevant. So first in family, low SES, and so on. And but the biggest difference now is between people who are from regional areas and from major cities, and that might be because in Australia people tend to attend universities that are closest to their homes. So if people from regional areas choose regional universities, it's possible that these have lower ATA thresholds, and that's why we observe lower rates of enrollment in selective institutions among this group. And the other thing is worth noting here is the result for women who were advantaged when it comes to overall enrollments, but when it comes to getting in a selective institution, are actually behind men. And NESB students are, and now I can say these are students because they are already enrolled, NESB students are actually more likely to enter selective institutions. And that's, again, a slide just showing you that combining two disadvantaging characteristics is really bad for the chances of being in a selective institution. But that was just to quickly show you that. And the more important bit is the moderation, which is the effects of first-in-family status, depending on whether someone is in an equity group or is not in an equity group. And mostly you will see that like the first 4 groups, we see stronger first-in-family effects. So it lowers the rate of enrollments for those that do not belong to the equity group. So it kind of works against it. And then for women, we actually see a higher effect of, well, a bigger effect of first in family studies. So women who are already slightly disadvantaged, they are also more affected by the first in family status. And same applies to to English speaking people of English speaking background. They have lower enrollment rates when it comes to high selective institutions. They're also affected more by the first in family status. Okay, and now going to the field of study. And I know this slide is cluttered because there's plenty of information to show. I'm maybe not going to discuss the results for every single group. I will focus on the first in family students. And you can see that they tend, so I surrounded the bars with red and or green boxes, depending on whether, so red is for fields that the first in family students or other groups here are underrepresented, and green is for where overrepresented. So one thing here is like, first, those differences quite often not that large, but we can see that first in family students are underrepresented in natural and physical sciences, but also in engineering and medical studies. Like here, the difference isn't huge in terms of percentage points. It's 0.9, but if you compare them, it's like 4 times larger rate for non-first in family students. And at the same time, we can see that there's an overrepresentation of first in family students in fields like other health. So it's health apart from medical studies and education. They looked at these results and also in conjunction with average incomes of graduates of different fields. And I was looking at those incomes from the time that these people were more or less the time when these people were choosing their fields. So you could say that, okay, they could observe those incomes. So yes, engineering and medical studies lead to lucrative careers, but it's not like first in family students are clustered in low paying fields. Education and other health are actually solidly in the middle. And actually natural and physical sciences are not doing that great income-wise. So the underrepresentation isn't really hurting them economically that much. And speaking of like other patterns here, you can see that first of all, it's there's no uniform pattern, although like other health and education tend to be more popular among many of the disadvantaged groups, but not all. So here, for example, indigenous people are not overrepresented in other health. Students with disability are actually underrepresented in other health and education, and they tend to study more often than students without disability, society and cultural creative arts. But the starkest differences we can actually see or observe for women, and this is probably no surprise, that are severely underrepresented in STEM fields, especially engineering and related technologies, as well as IT, and overrepresented in society and culture, but also education and other health. And interestingly, NESB students tend to be overrepresented in fields that other groups are rather underrepresented. Sorry, I should have put the rectangle here and change it to green. So they are overrepresented in STEM fields, but underrepresented in education, but also society and culture and creative arts. I will skip the slide on moderation effects, and I've got only one, despite there being many groups, and that's because there are not that many easily interpretable moderation effects when it comes to the field of study. It's mostly for women, where we observe that if there are any moderating effects, it would be like this, that the being first in family affects women more in areas where women are already underrepresented. And we also can see that there are a few places where there is a significant effect for regional remote and remote students, but it's harder to summarize. So in summary, just wanted to say that we've got first in family group, which is larger than other equity groups. The first in family students are overrepresented among low SES, indigenous, and to a smaller degree, rural and remote, as well as students with disability. That's an error here, sorry for that. And we've got wide gaps when it comes to university enrollment, still significant gaps between first in family and non-first in family students when it comes to entering selective institutions. Some differences when it comes to choosing fields of study. And what is important, because those models controlled for other characteristics, we could see that despite, first of all, first in family is an important predictor, but all other equity groups are still relevant, and are still important predictors of university enrollment and also choosing a selective institution. So this controlling works both ways. So it improves that, even if we wanted to include first in family as another equity group, we don't really have to drop other equity groups. They still have some effects. And just to talk briefly about the limitations, we can't really explore the mechanisms through which this all happens. So is it because of poorer grades? Is it because of aspirations or lack of funds? Can't really say what's going on there. The other thing is, it would be nice to include measures of academic achievement, and that would help to monitor especially those secondary effects that I mentioned, like inspired by Boudon's theory. And another thing is, we only look at fairly typical pathways. So people who entered university or almost straight after finishing their secondary education. So it's possible that once we extend the observation window, there will be more students that are first in family that enter, but they just need more time to enter higher education. And future research ideas for that is we can wait for the census 2021 to be linked to newer higher education data. And that would allow us to repeat the same project with just newer data and check whether there are any changes over time. But we can also extend the observation window first to include people who enroll later in their life, but also we can extend the observation window to include other outcomes. So use this massive data to monitor dropout completion, and as well as labor market outcomes of students first in family. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tomasz. That's a lot of food for thought for us. We will now move to Q&A. So I encourage everyone to use the Q&A button that's at the bottom of your screen to type your questions into the Q&A. If you're unable to type into the Q&A for any reason, you can use the raise hand function, and then we can try to unmute you to ask the question verbally. But we encourage you to use the Q&A function in the first instance if you are able to. While everyone is thinking and typing in your questions, I will start. So, Tomasz, the goal of this research is basically, to come up with an answer on whether first in family students should be an official equity group. And I think, your findings and results and your summary sort of hints at that, but should it or should it not be an official equity group?
Look, they're clearly disadvantaged when it comes to accessing university. So I would say they deserve to get some more support. If this requires them to be designated equity group, then maybe yes. But if there might be some other things to consider, like what being an equity group entails. So anyway, what I'm trying to say, it would be good to add some extra help, and possibly including them as an extra equity group.
Great, thanks, Tomasz. I guess a follow-up thought on that is, given the overlap between First in Family with the rest of the equity groups, if we add them as an equity group, would we be basically picking them up twice? For example, low SES, 88% of them are already represented in that group.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
When it comes to low SES, because with other groups, I think there are some distinctive characteristics of the other groups. So it's mostly about low SES because there's an overlap between, like low SES in Australia is uniquely defined by area where people reside.
Yep.
It's usually defined through measures like income and so on, and income is correlated with education. But it looks like those areas might, because it's an area-based measure, there's still part of this group that's not really included, and there might be some specific characteristics of those areas that still require some attention and some support. So that would probably require some research down the track. But I wouldn't be so fast as to say like no, we just discard the old category and just let's go with parental education. Also, like financial barriers can be a problem separately from parental education.
Great, thank you. I can see some questions coming in, so please keep those questions coming, but I'll ask one more before we move to what the audience has asked. So the definition that you've used is the no parents with university education. And in the early slide, when you went through the lit review, you correctly identified that there's other definitions in there. And also the mechanisms through which disadvantage might flow from being first in family. What I wanted to ask was, would you consider any alternative definitions to be, beneficial to looking at this? For example, siblings, adding siblings and whether or not they have university education into the definition.
Oh, I would definitely add siblings if I could. So that's the problem when you work with administrative data. It's like your research questions and methodology, and you sort of have to go back and forth, and it's an iterative process where you adjust your research questions depending on what you can find in administrative data. And the problem with the census is we can only link people if they live together, and people tend to move out once they actually, I think it's already for 18-year-olds, the rate of them living with parents drops sharply. That means that if we can't see them within this household, we can't, and we would be looking at all the siblings, right, who already went to university. So those siblings moved out, we can't link them. And that's the problem. So for us, it would be only possible to identify siblings that go to university but decided to live with their parents. And as I said, the rate of people, like the proportion of people that still live with their parents, drops massively with age. So yes, as much as I would like to see whether siblings have an effect, or like if we get really great data that allow us to do this, we could actually see whether try to isolate different effects, like comparing families with parents have higher education and their siblings with higher education to families where only siblings have higher education, and so on. So this would be all interesting. It just wasn't feasible with the data at hand.
Yeah. Thanks, Tomasz. That's a very clear answer. And I guess the definitions can only be as good as what the data can support. And particularly from the perspective of policy making, that's going to be very much dependent on what data there is out there at the moment as well. Thank you. Let's move to the audience. So we have a question from Ben Archer. What time period did your data include?
So we've got Census 2016 linked with higher education data going up to 2019.
Great, Thank you.
And migration data go like we just accessed whatever we could, so it's probably from 2005 or something like this, and we just look at whether someone got PR at some point.
Great, thank you. We've got another question by Shamit Saga. We can see first-in-family differences in choice, selectivity, and study fields. Are these distortions made worse or remedied when it comes to labor market returns? And what are the policy implications in your opinion?
We haven't looked at the labor market returns yet, so
yeah,
can't really
I
answer
guess
this.
your findings does hint a little bit at that first-in-family students tend to go into fields of study that probably have lower labor market returns.
I would say they go like that's something that comes also that's supported by previous studies, so that they go for like safe choices, and other health and education are not that bad when it comes to graduate salaries. They're like in the middle, and these are also fairly well defined career paths. So you could argue that, like, what do you do? What's your occupation as a philosopher or sociologist? Whereas, if you're a physiotherapist or a teacher and you choose those fields of study, it's pretty clear what you might do in the future. And career path is fairly clear, and also incomes are probably easy to guess. So in the middle, they actually avoid those low-paying fields like creative arts and social sciences are really at the bottom. And actually, surprisingly, life sciences are not that far. And it's just engineering and IT that result in high salaries. But yeah, first-in-family students, I would say they go for like safe choices, but somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, thanks for that, Tomasz. And I guess apart from salaries, maybe to have a more holistic conversation around labor market outcomes in the future, we should also be looking at things like job satisfaction, because that's
but not with this data.
Not with data again, but yeah.
No, but we could look at things like unemployment. So there might be jobs that like result in high salaries, but it's very few jobs that offer those salaries, and otherwise people struggle to find a job. So I guess also checking, like, again, not with this data, it would be nice to check how quickly they find a job.
Great. Yeah, excellent points, Tomasz. All right, those are the questions we've got from the audience. Any last questions before, or anyone wants to raise their hand and ask a question verbally? If not, I think let's thank Tomasz for the great presentation, and we all look forward to seeing the final report published on the ACSES website in due course. There will be other small grants that will be published as and when they become ready to be published as well. So if you have not already, please do engage with the ACSES website. There is also a subscription option to our newsletter, so you can be updated on the latest events, publications that arise from our funded offerings. Thank you very much, Tomasz. I can see a lot of virtual claps, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.